Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Ann-Christine Link, and I'm a PhD student, currently part of a summer program at YASA, where I'm working on the following topic that I would like to present today. The title of this project is The Tail End of Migration, Assessing the Climate Well-Being of Migrant Households in Ethiopia. And I'm doing this project together with Roman Hoffmann and Thomas Brenner. And I'm going to dive right into the context of this kind of research. And we'll be looking at shocks, more specifically climatic and environmental shocks, so droughts, landslides, floods, and heavy rains, and how this is impacting the well-being of migrant and non-migrant households in Ethiopia. And we picked Ethiopia as a case study country because of its high vulnerability to climate. And we're not just going to pay attention to the resistance of households to shock, what is very often done, so the direct impact a shock has on the well-being, but also recovery. And we talked about this earlier, that there's also like a time lag that we have to consider. So this is what we're doing here. If a shock happens, what is the case 1, 2, or 3 years after when it comes to well-being? And we all know that households are not a homogeneous group. And this is why we want to pay attention to different characteristics at the origin, so where migrants came from, the migration process, and also characteristics at the destination. And the characteristics we want to look at are, for example, the level of urbanity, the GDP of the region they came from, and agriculture dependencies. Okay, and we want to take a look at the migration process characteristics. So looking at whether the number of migrants per household has an impact on the well-being, or the gender, the distance of migration, or the age of the migrants. Next, I would like to focus on why this kind of research is needed. So first of all, there is a lack of research on the migrants' well-being to climatic shocks at the migration destinations, because most of the time researchers are looking at the resilience or well-being at the migration origin and what is kind of pushing them into human mobility. And next, we just want to get a much better understanding of the mechanisms behind the differential impacts on well-being. And in the end, it's our goal to support targeted interventions to increase the well-being of vulnerable populations, whether this is migrant households or non-migrant households. And no, it's not good. Okay, next I'll dive into the methodology. So first of all, I would like to talk about the data that we're using. We're working with longitudinal data from the Living Standards Measurement Studies by the World Banks. And here for Ethiopia, we have access to 3 different waves. We came up with a well-being index, which is based on 7 different dimensions, which are all made up of 2 variables, which I will cover on the next slide, so you can take a look at that. And then we conducted fixed effect panel regressions to model the impacts of shock on well-being, paying attention to resistance and recovery for the entire sample, so all 5,000 households, or for non-migrant and migrant households. And then in the sample, we have about 900 migrant households, just to give you a better understanding of the data. Next, we're doing this further explorative analyses with the characteristics to just get a better understanding of the mechanism itself. And in the end, the goal is to apply this kind of approach to other countries where this LSMS data is also available. And so far, we're looking at Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ghana. I also want to quickly highlight that these are all preliminary results, so we might make some changes here and there, and I'm very happy to receive any kind of feedback and comments on this. Right here, you can see the well-being index that we came up with, which is composed of 7 dimensions, which are education, health, food security, assets and expenditures, economic livelihood, infrastructure and housing. And here you can kind of see the distribution of this well-being index for migrant households in red and non-migrant households in turquoise for the 3 different waves. And what we're seeing here is that the well-being has increased over the 3 different waves. We see a slighter increase between wave 2 and wave 3. But what we also see is that migrant households tend to have a much higher well-being than non-migrant households, which might be a little bit surprising to some of you. Next, we wanted to take a look at the shock experiences. What you don't see in this graph is that migrant households are actually way less affected by shocks in general. And what this figure is showing, if a migrant or a non-migrant household is affected, what kind of a shock are they experiencing? In yellow, we can see price shocks. So both migrant and non-migrant households tend to experience price shocks. And what we mean with that is a price rise, a price fall, or a price input increase. But the second most relevant shock to Ethiopian households are climatic and environmental shocks, followed by health, agricultural, conflict, and other shocks. And this is the last slide that I have prepared, and probably also the most exciting one, at least to me. It's a coefficient plot which shows the different shocks on the y-axis and what kind of impact they have on the well-being index for all households, non-migrant households, and migrant households. And what we're seeing is that, as expected, shocks have a negative impact on the well-being of households. And it is the health shocks and the climatic and environmental shocks which have the strongest negative impact on the well-being. And I also want to highlight this right here, because climatic and environmental shocks have a significant negative impact, especially for migrant households, and can decrease the well-being of migrants between 5 and 10%. And with that, I would like to end this presentation, and I'm happy to receive any kind of comments, feedback, or ideas. Thank you.